The first observation is this is the almost definitely the most developed car that we've seen so far. I know we looked at the Haas, and the Haas was quite well detailed. I don't think it's as developed as the Red Bull, and no doubt, all of their rivals have got lots of clever stuff yet to show us. But in terms of what we've been able to see, I think at the moment the Red Bull really is the car to have a close look at and to learn about what these regulations are all about. There's stuff from the very front of the car all the way to the very back. Some of them things that are quite logical, some things which we can't quite get our heads around yet. If you look at his track record, Newey has always been good at finding solutions when the regulations change and finding the subtle way of repackaging things. He's not a guy that comes out with big long-term innovations. Is always working around whatever the rules are constricting him to. So it's the perfect year for him in lots of respects. At the front wing itself is, dare I say it, quite conventional as we've seen so far. Mid-loaded. The nose reaches out to the end. There's sort of nothing especially that we've seen that side that maybe surprises us. But then you go into the front suspension. But what they showed was the pull rod suspension, and that is just where the rod that operates the springs of the dampers is now going down from the wheels to the bottom of the chassis. And people talk about it as a big thing, but it's not even a primary or even a secondary kind of performance factor in the car. It's just a piece of packaging. But what they've done with the top wishbone is quite interesting. If you look at the top wishbone on virtually any race car, it's almost horizontal in terms of where it mounts to the chassis. Sometimes it's inclined slightly, but the Red Bull is inclined, to a massive degree. The bottom leg is, 10 or more centimetres lower than the front leg. And there could be two reasons for this. We haven't seen anything like this for a long time. In fact, I can't even actually think of it ever in Formula One. But there's two things. First of all, it could be aerodynamic. So they're doing something with that rear leg of the upper wishbone to shape the airflow going around the fronts of the side pods and the tunnels and things. Or it could be actual suspension geometry. And that's quite interesting. Now, looking at that would suggest to me that car is running with almost no anti-dive geometry. So you can set the angle of the front wishbones up to prevent the nose diving under braking. What they have there is a centre of gravity would actually work through the angle of the front suspension and make the nose want to dive more under braking. Typically, you would say that's a bad thing. With this year, knowing that the cars are very bad in the low-speed corners, that the front wing is very high off of the ground, and that they don't have lots of the clever suspension geometry and springs and dampers and hydraulics and bits and pieces to play with, maybe this is a means for Red Bull to get the nose down into a corner that's got heavy braking, which would therefore suggest that it is going into a lower speed, medium speed corner, and a way of actually trying to put a bit of temporary rake into the car to get the nose down, get some grip and get the car out of there. So far, people on track are saying that Verstappen's driving very smoothly and he's keeping the car very level and very flat. Now, that could be a bona fide driving style, or it could be the fact that they're trying not to show the effect of this suspension geometry too early. Again, it's way too early for us to kind of speculate if that's definitely, but there's definitely something going on there, and we need to have a look at that. The loads in the suspension would be somewhat odd, and the geometry of the front wheel in suspension movement would be quite odd. It would actually be, again, I'm actually now saying it off the top of my head, I think it would actually increase the amount of caster in the suspension, would certainly play about with the camber to a degree. Now, suspension movement will probably be a bit more this year, but not as much as people may expect, because these low profile tyres aren't that low profile. Still, a lot of the suspension comes from the tyre. So yeah, there will be some trade-offs there. It's a bold move. It would be something very hard to rectify unless they've already designed another more conventional front suspension mount into the tub. So we'll watch this space, I guess. The front wing is, as I say, at the moment, surprisingly conventional. The mid-loaded, long nose tip, again, something that could change very, very easily. It's interesting that they've split the nose cone in a slightly similar way to Ferrari and Haas, that you have because the nose is now so long that you could actually detach the front section of nose from the rear section, and the front wing also will dismount from that front section as well. So effectively you've got a three-piece front end. I think in a pit stop you would still replace the entire assembly, because that's where the quick removal fasteners are a bit further back to take the whole nose off. So it's just odd. It'd be interesting to see one of these cars, and I use this word slightly guardedly, be interested to see one of them crash to try and understand a bit more of the structure that's inside there, to see if the front of the nose is, a non-crash structure part, and the second half of the nose is actually where the crash structure is. But I think it's crash structure all the way to the tip because of the increase in loads that they've got for the crash test this year. So I mean, the side pods are the big talking point. I guess I could be quite excited because my sketch concept for the year actually drew most of the Red Bull side pods out, so I'm quite pleased with that. Some of the key things that they're doing with the side pods, you see there's quite extreme undercut under the front of the side pods, and this kind of duckbill entrance to the cooling inlets at the front of the side pods. So what's going on here isn't, I mean, the airflow into the side pod to go to the radiators is affected by all of this, and it's a relatively clever way of doing things. But this duckbill and this undercut section is all about trying to direct airflow to the floor edge at the front of the floor. And this is an area, as we've spoken about so much, particularly last year with the regulation changes on the floor, this is an area where the teams create a lot of downforce, and a lot of the work that they're doing on this front half of the floor to create downforce is quite important. So how you shape the throat of the diffuser, the fences that are in the front of the tunnels as well, are all trying to work that area. And Red Bull have really developed this area much more than we've seen on any other car so far. I think we've got some extra bits to appear on there, but also as you look at the second half of the floor edge going towards the rear tyres, you see all sorts of cutouts, and Red Bull are trying to work this entire area much more to create downforce, and then pretty much leave the inner half of the throat of the tunnels to work the main length of the tunnels and out the back of the car. And this is all really quite interesting. It's all very joined up thinking with the Red Bull. The radiators are quite conventional. It's got a relatively conventional Coke bottle shape with the exiting just in front of the rear beam wing, which in itself is another probably quite radical change, and one that I certainly didn't predict on the car. So we know that the beam wing has come back this year, and the main aim of the beam wing was to effectively extend the underfloor tunnels and get them to work with the beam wing and the rear wing to create this upwash, which is the whole sort of philosophy behind trying to allow these cars to follow each other, because you're getting all the dirty wake up high and central behind the car, which means the car behind you then has much cleaner air to work in, literally until you're right on the tail of the other car. So everyone seems to have gone with a conventional two-element beam wing. So you have one wing acting like the main plane on the beam wing, and then another one which acts like the flap. So it's just two elements in tandem in the airflow working with the diffuser. And this creates lots of downforce. It's a really clever way of getting the floor to work. Adrian Newey, or certainly Red Bull, have gone quite a different way with this. They've really, rather than gone with a tandem beam wing, have gone with what you can only describe as a biplane beam wing. So one element sits above the other. Now the lower element is aligned with the tunnel exits and works to extend the tunnels, as I was just explaining, to create all of the downforce. The other one is spaced above it within the same volume that you're allowed to have. And this one is working in a slightly different way. It's working much more with the cooling exit that comes out the back of the Coke bottle shape of the side pods, and it's creating low pressure and it's sucking all the air out of the side pods and getting that again away from the working element of the beam wing. This is really clever. This is something that again I don't think anyone really thought about when we did see some of the initial car renders. Some teams even just had a single element beam wing, thinking that it's not a very aggressive angle of attack, it's not worked too hard, so we don't need to put a split into it. And Red Bull have found an area where they really can exploit it. So certainly any of the cars that are working with a more conventional Coke bottle exit, or what we've been calling the can exits, the letterbox exits at the back of the side pods, would need to go and have a look at this if they haven't already, or maybe even already got it in mind. It's quite an interesting solution, fits within the regulations quite neatly, and just shows some of that working around things that you see so much on Newey's cars.